Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I think we were spot on 10 o'clock my time, which is let me hazard a guess, 6 o'clock.
Yep.
For Fleetside, which must mean 5 o'clock Central Time if you're in Central Time, and 3 o'clock Pacific Time. So pleased to say that we've got Mr. Fleetside back again, which is great. You've put another really comprehensive slide presentation together, which I will try and take control of and get them in the right order and
perfect,
the right size. So yeah, well, thanks again for joining us. Well, I'll leave it up to you to introduce what you'd like to start off with.
Okay, so thanks very much, Paul.
You're welcome.
Today's discussion, I mean, we had to have a fourth presentation here because I hadn't done anything in the pastel shades when it comes to the background, and this one's got a hideous purple background. So
excellent.
We'll see what it's actually quite revolting. And maybe Paul, if you're able to put up the first slide, just to get that technology out of the way.
Yes.
And then people don't have to stare at you and I as much.
Well, I can make it fill the full screen. There you go.
Well, you might want to see us a little bit.
Back. Well,
okay.
we can come back to
you
and I.
Perfect.
There you go.
There it is. Okay, so there's the first slide. So here's what's broken. So my attempt to try to put an opinion out there is to put my finger on what's broken here, and it's by my submission not exactly what we're looking at or looking for. It's something a little different. Maybe the next slide, if you would, Paul.
Sure.
I'll situate this within the three others that we've done. So so this is the fourth in a series. The first one, so these are making a murder, an analysis of truth through analyses. So the general thrust of these is to look at how we analyze analyzing our analyses of all things.
Yes.
Something I mentioned I do for a living. I do for kicks.
I wonder what you do for entertainment. Eh?
Well, that's the thing. I enjoy this, but I'm horrible at cocktail parties, dull and boring.
So I don't think so. I don't think so.
So the first one was the quest for the Holy Grail, where we were looking at the larger picture around what it is the truthers have been zeroing in on, and then in part two we got into this micro and macro with two truths are told, introducing some terminology that defines the breadth of our analyses. And then in part three, on managing the Great Divide, so looked at probity and analysis, and this is where I brought out, I'll bring it back in this presentation, but what I refer to as the sort of X and Y graph, which draws the distinction between analyzing for the ideal of seeking the truth versus on the x-axis the notion of analyzing to advantage, or comfort, or and so this one, part four, is here's what's broken. And what I'm hoping to do, much as in the earlier presentations, cast the light to suggest where truthers are focused, and suggesting that there are other avenues that perhaps we could look at as we are looking at those, without diminishing the good work there, to broaden the horizon. This one I'm looking more in this micro versus macro, at the justice and the notion of justice and the justice system itself. So hoping to plant a thought there as to where those exploits are taking us, and things that we can do to help. So the next slide, if you would, Paul.
Sure.
So here's what's broken. So what I'll do is I'll go through, first of all, defining justice. That's a very broad topic area, and I'm not a lawyer. I'm an analyst. I've worked with lawyers, enjoyed working beside them for decades. But nonetheless, from perhaps an analyst perspective or a layman's perspective, however you want to put that, and I'll try and situate that within the larger theater of how we consider what we consider justice to be, so we can reach back to see whether we're getting it here. The second part I'll get into is the injustice associated with the Stephen Avery case, and I'll touch in the confines of the legal process that we're engaged in currently, or others are engaged in, and I'll bring this back to the ducking by the mainstream media. They have a role to play, and I think they need to be brought forward on that, and I'll explain why that is, and I'll touch on the truthers, guilters, and this notion of shining the light. We had talked in last time about the story of the individual looking for the coin in the where the light is better.
Absolutely.
So, where we shine our light. Then I'll get into what I refer to as the KZ micro ceiling. What the hell is that? So I'll talk about the notion that I believe she's constrained in a certain way.
Yep.
Try and put some context to that, and then I'll get into what I see as truly broken, followed by a quick view of the nature of the prize at the light at the end of this tunnel, what we're hoping to do, and how that's a shrinking prize, as we've said before. Yep. Time is of the essence here, and we'll get into some conclusions. So the first slide, if you will, that's the so this is the hideous purple background.
That's not that bad. It reminds me of my school uniform, the purple blazers I had to wear.
Sorry. Yes, it's lovely. Amazing what they put into a school uniform. Okay, so yeah, on defining justice, I'm going to look at the sort of the international context of justice, and then bring it down to the sort of the U.S. Level, and mention this idea of the importance of confidence in the justice system, and where that comes from, and then I'll get into the role of the public and a suggested role for the truther.
Sure.
So that's on to the next slide, if you would, Paul.
Absolutely.
And so what I've done is gone to the United Nations. I've looked at other sources. I'll touch on the United Nations, and I'll touch on Amnesty International, and I cherry-picked out of that and copied into the slides areas that I thought were of significance to where we find ourselves in the Stephen Avery case. So from the United Nations, obviously the United States is a signatory to United Nations conventions, one of which is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And in there, the poignant lines that I lifted out and copied in here: dignity and worth of the human person, universal respect for and of observance of human rights and fundamental freedoms. And there was a discussion in there in the Declaration of the High-Level Meeting of the Rule of Law. Heads of states and governments emphasized the right of equal access to justice for all, reaffirming their commitment to ensure fair, transparent, effective, non-discriminatory, and accountable justice services to leave no one behind. To reduce the level of prolonged and arbitrary detentions. So certainly we've seen both prolonged, and we'll see how arbitrary, we'll get into the arbitrary as well. Hence the professionalism and accountability of judicial staffs and systems. So within the United Nations, certainly the U.S. is as signatory supports these notions of what we're trying to, what we find as important in justice. Now, next slide, the Amnesty International. So I borrowed from them their mission and vision, and I'll read it out. Amnesty
Yes.
International's vision is of a world in which every person enjoys all of the human rights enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other international human rights instruments. In pursuit of this vision, Amnesty International's mission is to undertake research and action focused on preventing and ending grave abuses of these rights. So I would argue that certainly in the Stephen Avery case, we have or we're certainly questioning his rights and right to a right of justice. Our core principles: Amnesty International forms a global community of human rights defenders based on the principles of international solidarity, effective action for the individual victim, global coverage, universality and indivisibility of human rights, impartiality, independence, and democracy, and mutual respect. And they all lived happily ever after. So Amnesty International, basically, it's not a UN organization, but it recognizes the Declaration of Human Rights and works very hard. There's offices on US soil. And what's interesting about these organizations is when it comes to the US, for example, or we'll use all the countries out there. You've got another institution apart from the important institution of justice. You've got another important institution called the military, and the Department of Defense in the U.S., the Department of Defense in Australia, the Ministry of Defense in the U.K., or the Department of National Defense here in Canada. Yeah. All of those militaries, we, in the interest of justice, put the brave persons in uniform in harm's way in pursuit of this important element of justice throughout the globe. This is an essential tenet to outreach programs outside the U.S. So now, so the next slide, I'm going to bring in within the U.S. So the United States Department of Justice, principles of federal prosecution to contribute to the fair, even-handed administration of the federal criminal laws. Important, though these principles are to the proper operation of our federal prosecutorial system, the success of that system must rely ultimately on the character, integrity, sensitivity, and competence of those men and women who are selected to represent the public interest in the federal criminal justice process. So the public interest. Yes. It is with their help that these people have been prepared, and it is with that these principles have been prepared, and it's with their efforts that the purposes of these principles will be achieved. So the key point in there is it's a public interest piece. It's something that we all have an obligation to support and see upheld, and it raises the question, certainly in the case of the Stephen Avery situation, how our report card on that would look if we were to evaluate how comfortable are we with that this is being observed. In the next slide, I grab from the American Bar Association Model Code of Judicial Conduct. And so I'll continue to, unfortunately, for viewers, I have a lot of words in here. Inherent in all the rules contained in this code are the precepts that judges, individually and collectively, must respect and honor the judicial office as a public trust, right? A public trust. It's not anybody else's judicial system. It is a public trust. Yeah. And strive to maintain and enhance confidence, right? Confidence in the legal system. And so that's contained within the preamble of the this code of conduct. Sure. Model Code of Judicial Conduct. And it has a series of canons within. So I cherry-picked another one here. Deference to the judges and the rulings of courts depends upon public confidence, right? In the integrity and independence of judges. The integrity and independence of judges depends in turn upon their acting without fear or favor. Although judges should be independent, they must comply with the law, including the provisions of this code. Public confidence in the impartiality of the judiciary is maintained by the adherence of each judge to his to this responsibility.
Yes.
Conversely, violation of this code diminishes public confidence in the judiciary and thereby does injury to the system of government under law. So,
Absolutely.
So it's basically citing the justice system as one of the foundational elements of healthy society. It's the people's system. It's not owned by someone else. And it is a public trust. And confidence is a key underpinning. So the next slide, cherry-picked some more elements out of the American Bar Association.
Sure.
An independent and honorable judiciary is indispensable to justice in our society. And that's the first borrowed from the first canon in the code. Misuse of office. The test for appearance of impropriety from the commentary to Canon 2A. Okay, this is a commentary with it. Of the 1990 Model Code is an objective one based on the perceptions of a reasonable person. So this reasonable person test is an important element to that confidence, foundation of confidence. Whether the conduct would create in reasonable minds, right, a perception that the judge's ability to carry out judicial responsibilities with integrity, impartiality, and competence is impaired. So, long story short, we are all to witness and review and opine as best we can understand to ensure we have confidence. And it recognizes that absent the proper conduct, we should expect things to fall apart. That's the very reason why this code is there. In other words, natural human tendency may take us down a different road were it not for the rules and regulations and upholding these within the canons of this judicial code of judicial conduct.
Absolutely.
And we as now, obviously I'm not in the United States, but that's one reason I brought in the larger picture of what is justice. And we're all one happy family in the pursuit of justice, but more directly for truthers on the shores of the U.S., that's their institution, and it's important that they play a meaningful role in maintaining and ensuring confidence in it.
Absolutely.
So the next slide. So these are my words, not lifted out of.
Sure.
This is life according to Fleetside, but the reasonable person test is extremely important. The justice system is a component of the institutional building blocks of a healthy society, along with justice, along with health, along with especially health these days, right? But the various elements. The average person is not just a spectator. Then you're part of the drama. You're part of the safety monitoring. You're part of the feedback. So legal acumen or lack thereof is not a sufficient basis to deny observation or inquiry. So in other words, the system is not only there for lawyers to observe, but it does touch down to the public, which includes us.
Absolutely.
So in other words, in my sense of it, the law is not a magical, mystical formulation that resides on a cloud somewhere that you can just let someone else deal with and go about your business. So if someone said, mind your own business, we have this in hand, you don't have the acumen to be able to understand, and this would not be a sufficient retort. Now, this isn't verbatim what has been said in the past, but there have been others that have intimated that the truther community should go away and leave this sort of vigilance to them.
Yes.
To those suggesting we not be further involved. So the reasonable person test is a collateral component of the mission for the courts and their legal proceedings to ensure the public maintains confidence in their system of justice.
Absolutely.
And the next slide. So this is where I was going to get into the role of the truther in my submission. So truthers are conducting themselves, where we're conducting ourselves through sound analytic practice. We talked extensively about that, what that is, and our tremendous responsibility, because we're unencumbered by, canons, rules, regulations, etc. We are able to free think, and that's a good thing, provided we adhere to that one prerequisite I would suggest is sound analytic practice. But we are or certainly on shores in the U.S., that is those are the reasonable people, and and they should be conducting as part of their civic duty that reasonable person test. So by all means, interpret integrity in the application of the law, as we're doing in this case. So that's my little part one to position this thing.
Sure.
It's that we're legitimate consumers of information in this regard. So the second segment gets into injustice for Stephen Avery, and you'll notice on the that slide there, I put in brackets, Brendan Dassey being merely collateral damage. So in my sense of it, and others have raised this, that Stephen Avery is probably the figure of intrigue that gave rise to this whole thing, and Brendan Dassey unfortunately became collateral damage when they, in order to make one incarceration stick, he was thrown into the mix. So that's why, for that reason alone, in this pursuit, I'm looking at the Stephen Avery circumstance, because that's the context that has greater legs than the micro view that the courts are looking at. So I'll touch on the notion that blinders limiting the official process to the micro. And then ducking by the mainstream media. So the term ducking is, I'm sure we've all used that as duck, but it's also a technical term in engineering. But the notion of standing down on your official duty, and we'll get to what that duty is, and then talking about shining or reshining that light for the truthers and the guilters, for that matter. So the next slide, the injustice for Stephen Avery, and this notion of micro blinders to the micro. So the current process to me is constrained. It is limited. So if you compare to the moral argumentation that we as truthers have raised extensively and contextualized this thing through the 40-year journey that gave rise to to today, but certainly to in the lead up to the 2005 incarceration. So the current process is limited. So in court, the argumentation is does not touch on or treat in any way that larger notion of legal propriety or lack thereof impropriety, right? So if what I referred to before is this larger elephant, the elephant in the room, the 40-year legacy, that is at no place in the storyboard. We're simply afforded the opportunity and the legal challenge to opine on the circumstances of the 2005 situation and events since. And even then, it would seem that we're mechanically, tactically, procedurally locked to the earlier findings, put it that way. So one of the challenges I have when we read you see the briefs go over, and then you see the findings that are produced. So it's confined to the 2005. It attempts to discredit some of the surprise findings. Let's say we didn't perhaps anticipate that came back. Each individual argument it's almost as if they compartmentalize in the findings the various different arguments that are made in the brief and try to defeat them within that little compartmentalization.
Mhm.
In other words, the pattern of context between these, that there are on many fronts, even in that micro horizon, a pattern of coordination that one would think would be significant. And then secondly, that it is devoid of any context that reaches back to the 40-year elephant in the room.
Mhm. Yeah.
So it procedurally avoids the larger issues, essential background for determining that reasonable person test, the test of confidence in the courts, and the court's ability to find justice.
Yes.
The next slide, please. And this is the mainstream media duty. So we've talked a bit about this before. Mainstream media is another institution, one of those foundational building blocks for a healthy society. A trustworthy, resourceful, and objective mainstream media is an essential element of our societal health. Now, contrary to this, the professional calling, and I'll touch on what that is this idea to duck, to somehow be missing in action, to not report, to not take an interest, or worse still, to parrot data fed from say one side of the equation.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I look at Society of Professional Journalism and cherry picked out of their mission vision. Members of the Society of Professional Journalists believe that public entitlement is the forerunner of justice and the foundation of democracy. Ethical journalism strives to ensure the free exchange of information that is accurate, fair, and thorough. An ethical journalist acts with integrity. So the question, certainly in the Steve Avery case, the notion of fair and thorough. We can ask the truthers how they would rate their mainstream media in this case in bringing out the salient issues. And as I had mentioned earlier, in my view, if the mainstream media was doing its professional, acting per its professional calling, there wouldn't be truthers. We would sit at home on the couch eating popcorn and waiting for the news to come on, whereupon we would be informed so that we can then reach back that neural circuitry to make sure that the courts are, we maintain confidence in the courts. Yes. So there appears to be an across the board stand down, which I find odd.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because obviously Laura and Moira basically are acting as filmmakers, but they're also acting as journalists. Yeah. But they aren't your mainstream journalists. And I think I'm right in saying that when Making a Murderer came out, it was a bit of a surprise to people because they hadn't really had much in the way of that kind of journalism, which it's all well and good, Ken Kratz and all saying, oh, it was one-sided. It certainly wasn't one-sided. It simply presented the facts fairly.
Yeah, and as as your show and others have brought out, there's been extensive. We unfortunately we're sort of brandished with this brush where it's suggested that we've been somehow programmed by a TV show, and
yes.
Maybe the two, and I think that was very responsible journalism in my view, contrary to what we're seeing across the board, I think were it not for them bringing this issue out, the rest of the mainstream media would be missing in action. We never would have known anything about this. Right? Mm-hmm. Shudder to think. Yeah, go ahead.
Just the other day, I was looking through some old screenshots that I shared, that I took, because all of my correspondence with replies from Robert Herman have disappeared for some reason. I don't know why. But when he first wrote to me on Thursday, the 5th of May, 2016, he wrote, "Thank you for your input these past 2 weeks. But unfortunately, you watched a TV movie that was far from the truth. While the 1985 case is unfortunate, I am confident that justice was served in the 2005 case. So
Yeah,
there we go. Yeah.
Well, I think and appreciate you sharing that again. I think
Sure.
that's nothing has galvanized truthers more than that letter. I think so. I think his letter did a tremendous disservice to the cause in that it's expanded the strength of the truther community. And this very presentation, for its little contribution, this is centered exactly on that question of justice, trying to put some description around that.
Absolutely.
So the next slide.
Yes, indeed.
By the Mazers, just to continue that, I grabbed a little more, another piece off. So the Society declares these 4 principles as the foundation of ethical journalism and encourages their use in practice by all people in all media. Seek truth and report it, minimize harm, act independently, be accountable and transparent. Now, so seek truth and report it. I don't see any truth seeking here. And I don't see, if they are seeking the truth, they're certainly keeping it to themselves. Either that or we're all wrong and misguided, and maybe we shouldn't have watched the TV program that has us somehow in this zombie paradise of trying to seek justice. So the other interesting thing in there is minimize harm, which touches on the family of the victim or alleged victim, and the sensitivity there, which has us somewhat guarded. So, unfortunate for science, we do back off a bit as an etiquette of responsibility to the family, and that's an interesting challenge as well. But grosso modo, I don't see the media apart from the 2 original filmmakers. I don't see the mainstream media. There was one other, right? There was one other. Who was the other journalist that stepped forward? I'm pretty sure.
Well, John Farrak.
Yeah, Farrak. Yeah.
He wrote The Wrecking Crew. He had.
So boy, did he ever step forward? Eh? So it's funny. You've got 3.
Funny enough, that also Alison Durr, because I remember in August when Kathleen Zellner submitted her initial motion for testing. I phoned Robert Herman, I think it was a couple of days later, because in an article that I read in the Post Crescent, to do with that, it said that they'd gone to the sheriff's office, but Sheriff Herman was unavailable to comment. And I said to Robert, I said, I'm not particularly impressed by that carry on. Why didn't you go and speak with John Farrak? And he said, well, I can speak with who I want, but he must have been available, because he said, but it wasn't John Farrak, it was Alison Durr that came across.
I thought, and this whole so the fact that they're not you're not able to reach out. Actually, at some moments they've been open to you. You've gone the extra step to reach out, and your personality by nature, I would submit to it keeps them comfortable. It's a responsible discussion, and so until the gloves come off and you've had too many beer. But you certainly opened some doors there that appropriately. But this whole quest with the courts currently is a struggle for transparency, right? So it is extremely odd that this whole process is simply a struggle to have transparency that is foundational to the justice system that is the entitlement of the people, certainly within the U.S. So it's just a very awkward and strange circumstance.
Indeed.
Which brings us to the next slide.
Indeed.
2C. So here I was, on shining the light. Or in other words, people who didn't see that earlier, the idea of casting the direction of inquiry. In terms of researchers, I would argue the guilters have no light. The pilot light went out. I don't know. I framed them here as the playing on ambiguity, the lack of transparency, and as soldiers of social fortune. So advantage in that XY diagram, they are X to the max.
Mm-hmm. I've also sorry to interrupt again. I've also wondered if guilters have this sort of pragmatic point of view that, you know, if we allowed the focus to be on Stephen Avery being wrongfully convicted, a lot of us in Manitrock are going to have our, you know, our, you know, taxes go up as a result of having to pay him, and we don't really like him. So they're kind of happy with that sort of status quo, aren't they? You know.
Yeah, and that's a position of advantage, right? So they analyze to a benefit.
Yes.
Versus the truther that takes the information and then concludes to, you know, go where the data takes you.
Indeed.
So yeah, guilters, there's no light, soldiers of fortune. The truthers, now we're alone in the quest, and that's really strange. So there is no there's no institutional arm that I can see so the truthers are safeguarding a critical element of the constitutional underpinnings of society there, and there doesn't appear to be a support structure in there at all. The closest proxy would be this legal procedure that we're in currently, and what I'd like to submit there is that that's a very narrow and limited vein of reasoning against the moral backdrop of what we're witnessing here.
Absolutely.
So now, and as before, I suggested there's a bit of a truther myopia in the sense that the micro quest gets sort of consumes all the oxygen in the room. Yes. That's where the interest is. And I'd cited earlier, there's an incongruence in my view between that and the known larger picture of that 40-year elephant. And unfortunately, through that, we may have lost some key voices. There's three in particular. I won't mention them, but there's three critical voices that I think were part of the broader statusing that unfortunately I don't know that we lost them versus sure. I think what they did is they went into the underground. So they're working it. Don't worry. But
yes.
But I think that sharing their exploits would have been fruitful. But hey, that's the nature of the beast. So on to 3, and this notion of so the KZ micro sealing. What is that? So Kathleen Zellner, and the suggestion here is that she's constrained by what I refer to as a micro. So micro, as I explained before, the events of 2005 Manitowoc, and the subsequent incarceration. That's it. And a ceiling to suggest that she's not allowed to peer over that. So the next slide.
Well, could it be that she's peered over, but she's really not talking about it much at the moment?
Yeah. So and we touched on that before. So in my view, she's not only peered over, but I suspect she knows exactly what.
Yes.
She knows about the 40-year elephant in the room.
Yes.
That the system doesn't allow her to speak to forthrightly, or certainly be interesting to know how you contextualize that larger picture.
Yes.
But so individually, you could have a beer with her and have a great chat, very fulfilling. But procedurally, so that's the point of the micro sealing. What I'm trying to suggest, she's procedurally barred from going to that larger. So there's a difference between morality of the situation and what one would test in law here. And confidence turns on the morality, not just the narrow vein of reasoning in this argumentation we're sort of trapped in currently.
Mm-hmm.
So the Sheboygan County Circuit Court Judge, the Honorable, right? So obviously judges are honorable. Angela Sukowitz. Now the question there, and truthers have looked critically at what she has had to say, and rightfully so. I mean, have reviewed. Let me put it that way, and rightly reviewed. That's part of the civic duty to understand these things and and try to come away with a feeling of confidence.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in fairness to Judge Sukowitz, I wonder, is she similarly trapped in the micro observation? Like she can't she can't also reach outside beyond. So the extent to which there's a delta between the macro and the micro, that is a fault of the system, and both KZ and this judge are trapped within that not of their accord. So attribution of problem there is a challenge. However, I would say even passing that out the window, I still have some concerns with what I've seen, and so the intent here was then to review the argumentation. I'll do my sort of layman's position on what I see there. But so there's 10 points. The abuse of discretion. There was an request for additional testing that was denied.
Mm-hmm.
The argument that Stephen Avery was deprived of due process regarding those Brady violations, and the failure to turn over exculpatory evidence, that didn't seem to get considered or statused appropriately. The wrongful declaration re-authority, so denying the motion re-ineffective counsel and these blood spatter experts and whatnot. Failure to impeach the state's primary witness, so Bobby Dassey, right? There was extensive argumentation in the brief that explained the foibles in that, and that did not seem to get statused. Abuse of discretion in weighing scientific evidence. So this was new evidence, new science, and procedurally, I think it was on procedural ground. I don't know. We'd have to again. Travis could help us out. I keep leaning on his expert opinion, but certainly that got. It was not status the way we felt it would.
Sure.
The sixth item, error in law, applying the wrong standard and weighing the scientific evidence.
Yep.
It's very hard to understand how through a cross section of these 10 different items, rather than compartmentalizing them, obviously in concert, they have a message here of very strange, to say the least, very strange circumstance, and the findings that came back seem to be based on a plausible deniability and a convenient way to try to wrap this up. Either that, or they ignored some of these, right? So item 7, insufficient reasoning why these could not have been raised previously. So that's the timing, whether this is old context or new. Abuse of discretion in considering new evidence, that was tied to Brady as well, Brady violation. Abuse of discretion ignoring briefs submitted. So, for example, that compelling of the Dassey computer. So there was elements that either were not addressed at all, or certainly didn't get status the way we thought they would go. Mistake in denying the supplemental motion regarding the return of the bone. So that was a big one. So on top of all this, so morally, and as truthers modeling this situation, you look at a 40-year history of intrigue, persecution, and all kind of weird stuff, and then of all things, you see that the evidence starting to be destroyed under your nose. So for the first marker is you're looking for transparency, which is the obligation of the court in terms of court system, in terms of bolstering public confidence. Transparency in any government operation is extremely important part of the health. That's why we have access to information, FOIA procedure, etc. But to be denied that unnaturally, and then suddenly under our nose to see the evidence being destroyed, that's just compounding an already compounded insecurity in the confidence of this thing.
Sure.
So the next slide, and then we get
Yes.
into what's truly broken, and the winner is. Could I have the envelope, please?
Yes.
As if it was that simple. But it is that simple in a certain sense. So the next
Yes.
slide, so what is not broken, and that's the next slide. Our friends here. It's amazing how, so again, for Dassey, I look at that as collateral to maintain the Stephen Avery case. In the Stephen Avery situation, he has been consistently, I think, in terms of honorable representation and transparency, the guy on the left there is the bastion of consistency and transparency. You'd love to see that from the opposition. But,
it's almost at times as if he has that sort of almost naive honesty about it, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Well, the pair of them.
Yeah, and if what they say about being, how do I put that delicately, being happy-go-lucky, sort of.
Sure.
You could. If you were benevolent and of sufficient intelligence, one would think you could condition and manipulate. And he absolutely was calm and transparent, and nothing to hide, open, and his points have been consistent, not like the consistently changing stories on the other side.
Oh yes, yeah.
So man of the year for integrity. I don't know. Maybe we'll see. At some point, when exonerated, this will run up a flagpole.
Yes.
Be the poster child for. So the next slide.
Yes.
So there is, and this is obviously borrowed from. I didn't actually get an elephant and put it in the office, but I just find it amazingly. It's an amazing statement in our institution to see us and them procedurally burrowing into the detail in the microcosm on and procedurally trying to lock down argumentation while closing off transparency and even destroying some of the track record. To have that narrow focus while the elephant's in the room. Obviously, the judiciary looking at current case would be apprised of the narrative that goes back pre-1985, and just amazing that the system can go forward as if nothing's strange, and time ticks on. Right? So we'll get away from the elephant that's in. There is an elephant in the room. So an example closer to home: you want to buy this fine house, and you send in inspectors, and you have them go through, and you want to check the wiring and check the ventilation system and check the appliances that come with all these little minutia detail, and the whole friggin' foundation's gone, man. I mean, So it as a sort of parallel, I just find how on earth are these these institutions that we're supposed to have confidence in able to so absurdly ignore the obvious.
Indeed.
So next slide. So what I find is missing in action here is the and we went through these before, but the pre-Bernstein, the 1985 original case, but well before that, the sort of persecution of I call the whole thing a persecution of 40 years, but there was certainly the in my view, Stephen Avery's rights were falling into question right from the time he was a teenager. Same incestuous players coming back with reach back to one ringleader. So you can imagine any of the books written, any of the cases challenging. There's one in the courts right now. Their legal representations happen to be in the same pool of participants. It's as if this cartel or whatever you want to call it, this group, can't reach outside its membership. And there's not supposed to be a group, or there's not supposed to be a membership other than what's officially sanctioned. So somehow there's this insidiously and incestuously the same players recurring. So the highly improbable, imagine lightning striking twice, a cycle of incarceration, exoneration, the conflict of interest that the county was in, the battle against the civil suit, and then just in time, fresh incarceration,
Yes.
followed by a concerted effort in subterfuge, books, internet traffic, and communications to media. And then followed by the destruction of evidence, and hopefully we're on the doorstep of another exoneration.
Yeah.
But the totality of that is so, the idea of that being random chance would be so absurdly remote as to require that we shine the light there and see what's going on. The track record of malfeasance in suppressing exculpatory evidence. So here, the whole initiation, certainly down the circuit court route, is just to begging the system for transparency, something that is, should be a fundamental entitlement, and so suppressing exculpatory evidence is
Yes.
in the first incarceration. Then they sat on certain information that would have let Mr. Avery out a long time earlier than
Absolutely.
So we know that there was a manipulation to maintain the incarceration then, and that's outside the hallowed halls of appropriate to justice. So then the lack of transparency, lack of fair play and professionalism, so unnatural withhold of evidence used to incriminate and incarcerate,
Yep.
Misrepresentation and manipulation of the process to avoid transparency, coincidental destruction of evidence. So it's one thing to withhold, it's another thing to, while you're withholding and nobody's looking, you're destroying. I mean, just incredible. And who's lifted a hand to try to deal with that? Where's the media in that? That's an incredible news story unto itself that should be transparent. I mean, that is the crime that we talk about is this thing that happened in 2005. The real crime is in this malfeasance, it would seem.
Mm-hmm.
So an extensive subterfuge, that a campaign of trying to bury this thing since. So the next slide, the shrinking prize. So we talked about this, and then we'll move on off the purple slide and into the pie chart. So the next slide, if you could, yeah. So what I did here is simply took your average male, if I understand correctly from the statistics in the U.S., average 76-year-old, 76 for a male. Average life expectancy, taking Stephen Avery's life since he was 18, and then broke it into these three sectors. The first one, the pink one to the right, represents the first incarceration, the wrongful incarceration from 1985 that I think started in 86, but would have been incarcerated since 85. Then the second, the lower sector, is the current 2005 that I can't recall, was it 2006, but
arrested again 2005, wasn't he? That's when he was arrested. That's he's been incarcerated since the moment. I mean, it was the end of June, just after the twins were born in 85. Got arrested the next day, and then got arrested, I think. Yeah, I'm going to say about the 8th of November in 05.
Yeah, so I mean, it's just the point in putting this into a pie chart is to bring home that this prize that we're all searching for has a timeline. It is, it's like a fuse that's lit as they run out the clock, as procedure gets delayed, justice delayed is justice denied. And putting all our weight behind the micro argumentation that KZ's permitted to pursue, the prize at the end is diminishing. Every year is probably 5% of that, and and sort of Brendan Dassey aside, but certainly in Stephen Avery, his horizon is limited, and we can't afford to just let this whimsically move forward under the system that we're supposed to be having confidence in.
Absolutely.
So the next slide, the conclusions.
Yes.
Try and have a point to this whole thing. So the first part of the conclusions. This is my XY diagram we talked about the other day. I changed the color application to suit this theme, so it'd be prettier. Yeah. But certainly the guilters are on the x-axis there, trying to maximize advantage. Analyses, if they care to call that, or books that are written are vacuous in terms of analytic principle, and but do have the intended purpose of applying benefit to certain players that would prefer to keep this under wraps. The truthers on the other hand are hugging the y-axis, and in my view, exercising sound analytic method, and in an undaunted sense, they're bringing forward the larger moral questions. So sort of a night and day between. Now, the interesting thing, we know that we talked about the mainstream media, that it's sort of hiding in the weeds, and I'm being generous there by giving them a bit of an inclination toward the Y, but I really see them as substantively X-leaning. But the fascinating piece in here are the courts, and the question around this: are the courts providing that confidence that the moral aspect of this thing is being treated and dispatched and treated appropriately? Do we have that confidence that is to be that we're to be vigilant over in what we've seen to date? Is the process we're leaning on even has it got its ladder against the right building? Are we pursuing the right? There is no facility for malfeasance, if there is such, if this is what's behind it, if there's a larger syndicate operating, there is no formal procedure to walk down the road and treat that. And certainly this current litigation is not leaning on that, much narrower.
Mm-hmm. I must admit, I would see both the court and the Manitowoc law enforcement arrows running far more parallel to the horizontal.
Yeah. It would seem that way, right? It just doesn't, and which is part of the drawing, is simply to provide a context, so we can make that point with some context around.
Yes.
But I think it's safe to say that your average truther is less than confident that the proper moral question is being treated, the totality of the circumstance, and B, that it's headed toward justice. That the argumentation that is before the court is headed toward justice. Looking again at the Supreme Court in the case of Brendan Dassey, and the oddity behind how that became sort of a hung concept and one in favor of doing nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So the next slide. So yeah, justice requires here anyway. This moral question requires that macro perspective, and in my submission, the courts don't go there, or in this case, I'm not expecting that they will go there.
Well, they haven't yet, have they?
Haven't yet. And don't forget the Supreme Court with Dassey, right? So
yes.
Were it not for that, I think we'd be hoping that simply going up through the seniority of the courts to a broader perspective, one more detached from that benefit of the y-axis, that somewhere up the line there will be an objective arbiter to do the right thing. But I'm not expecting that, and I don't. The Dassey situation really is something that we gotta look at. What happened there, and how did that How did that get shut down? Now, in my item 3 there, neither can KZ. So I much as we have her on a pedestal, and she's an incredible mind, and we could go on and on about the wonders. It would seem to me that she's procedurally imprisoned by a line of court procedure and argumentation that doesn't really treat the larger moral concern. There's no official facility to treat that macro that I mentioned. And then for truthers, the extent to which we confine ourselves to the micro horizon, trying to look at that whodunit in 2005, we could unwittingly become part of the subterfuge, burying this thing in a sea of intrigue. I think all along we know where the light needs to be shone. We know that there's a crime, all right, and it's not the one being talked about. And the final point there is to keep in mind the erosion of the prize. That time is of the essence. We will be, time barred from winning through the fullness of time.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And the last slide there.
Yes.
Next one. So the question at the bottom: how do we bring the inalienable macro debate front and center? So I'm suggesting it's inalienable regardless of what argument you bring forward as to who done it in 2005. Part and parcel of that, in my view, would be to contextualize it in that 40-year elephant in the room, and then decide. So you could say, yes, that was troublesome. We recognize all that context, but what truly happened here was just a coincidence. So my theory is that coincidentally none of that operated, and that we have, lo and behold, it was Colonel Mustard in the ballroom with the knife. It's a possible scenario, but. I'm, for my part, trying to see if we can shine some light on this larger elephant.
So just to go back on a point about Judge Sukovich. She, of course, was a member of the Crime Victims' Rights Board as an attorney before she became a judge, but she was a member on that panel. And there's not many people on that panel, but of course the chairman was none other than Ken Kratz.
And who was in reach of that? That was Peg Lautenschlager's panel, wasn't it?
When I did research on how the Crime Victims' Rights Board was assembled, it was like one or two people from different sectors. So there were a couple of lawyers, there was a couple of judges. A couple of defense lawyers, a couple of attorneys, a couple of people from the police department, and a few others. And there was indeed one appointment from it might have been the Attorney General, or it might have been the governor.
But certainly within the fan out of responsibility, so there's a ringleader in my sense of it. Let's say hypothetically there were a syndicate that was operating. Then we could hypothetically name the ringleader and the incestuous players, and those are the ones that recur. And you don't see new parties brought to this thing. There is a sort of a nepotism in a relationship sense.
Yes.
They don't, and they can't go outside the pale, which is very awkward to defend, in my view, if for confidence.
Certainly all the way through. Going back to everybody's first exposure to this, most people's first exposure to it was through Making a Murderer.
Right.
And what always struck me was that you've got these two people, Dean Strang and Jerry Butin, that are trying to do the best they can, but there's nobody else on their side whatsoever. As you say, that in terms of the media, they were quite happy to go along with it. And you know, you almost want. I was that naive. I thought, because most films do, have a happy ending, and I thought, who comes along and actually resolves this? Because when you read through those 10 items,
Yep.
What did I write down? The 10 Kathleen Zellner points. Yep. One would hope that when this is all resolved, they will have a proper investigation, not like the one conducted by Peg Lautenschlager. And somebody actually comes back and mentions everything that you've just presented there as being things that they should have done and which they didn't do, and they failed in these particular points.
Right, but here's what I suspect, as you know, the problem is if you shine the light on the elephant here,
yes,
you're going to get a web of intrigue that touches on other cases, right? So the Hochstetter and the Bembenek. Now, whether or not that's a legitimate statement is something that would have to be investigated. But if there is root rot and there's a syndicate and one needs to walk down that road of investigation, there's the full potential that not only first of all, anybody else incarcerated in association with this group would come into question, and then obviously we are. Some of the truthers are coincidentally looking at the Ricky Hochstetler and the Bembenek cases and other cases. So it would seem normal that if there were a corruption of the nature that would seem to tie a lot of these points up for the 40-year elephant in the room, there's going to be other cases that will dredge up at the same time. So there's pretty soon you get into a national security issue. You've got, for that motive alone, you'd almost want to suppress and close and move along.
Yes, I think that given the fact that I was particularly shocked at the way, surprised, if you like, when I spoke to Robert Herman, how blasé he was about the whole situation. He said, it's made us look bad, but life carries on and we'll be okay. And it's like, I often say this about some of the British people, that there are certain members of the sort of landed gentry that seem to have the embarrassment gene removed at birth. And it's almost like that with these guys, It's like their protection system must go so high up the food chain that they're not worried about it. Although they're saying that they're embarrassed by it, they're not.
Yeah, and much as I've talked from an ideal vantage point, the ideals of justice, and it is an ideal. It's very difficult for any country anywhere to operationalize it with perfection. But I suspect what happened in the case of this particular case is that those that you're citing and you're talking to, and that I'm referring to as being part of this incestuous group, they probably just grew into whatever has been there all along. Maybe these checks and balances were never in place, or maybe the checks and balances are too perfect a standard to hope for. But I suspect, long story short, I suspect the people you're talking to grew into this. They inherited it, and this is something that's been a way of life for, back to 1776.
Yeah. No, it's the question is, though, is, as you say, how do we? You touched on a very interesting point, because there's no sort of official government body like an anti-corruption unit set up. No. Well, there should be, and it's the FBI. But there's is there a state form of the FBI?
Well, no, I don't. Not no. No. That's your. Federal Bureau of Investigation for the Federation and onshore of the U.S.
Yeah.
Within the state, then you've got your now. Why don't we put that as a question? I don't believe there is, but is there anything that would operate at the state level that, or put more broadly, what are the counterbalancing? Where does one go with such a problem? If you've got a 40-year, if you're alleging a 40-year malfeasance, where do you take that allegation?
It's like as well. You've got within certain police forces, you've got what you would call like internal affairs or anti-corruption units. Clearly, if there ever was one in Manitowoc, it was a long time ago, and it died a death.
Yeah, and what we're talking about here is not just police, right? So when I say this, said earlier that this appears as choreographed. Like when I first saw the Stephen Avery thing, these MAM stories, and I was seized by a certain coincidences. One was the depositions, absolutely. The Carmen Bootwell, the RAV identity, coincidentally, the VIN number tampered with, and I went through just in my own mind, and this was years ago, but went through and said, no, this can't be too hard to figure out. Line up the coincidences and aim there, and you'll start to find out So I couldn't crack the nut. And what I thought, this just didn't seem surreal. It seemed like a psyop, as if this whole thing was some kind of a storyline, or I'm waiting for somebody to come out and say, hey, fooled you. This didn't really happen. These are actors. And I mean, this is just a surreal storyline that appears to be real. And so I'm perplexed. You even had the FBI. You mentioned the FBI. FBI was involved in some of the testing, right? So. Yeah. So it begs the question: if there is a ringleader, how much reach would that ringleader have? So you can almost define the ring and the ringleader, and not much you can do about it.
Well, having said that, though, clearly, funny you talking about the prize, because of course within our community the prize means something else. And when he obviously was of the opinion that he was destined for greatness. You mentioned at the beginning about lawyers. Well, of course, most of them either end up as judges or they end up as politicians. And he was very keen on becoming running for senate. Is that right?
I think he was.
And that failed.
Politics, anyway.
But he was definitely keen to get further and further up the food chain. But when his misdemeanors were highlighted by Ryan Foley, we see a great turnaround, a 180-degree shift in particularly the media, which I'm with you on this. The media are really accountable here.
Yeah,
they because they really are struggling to get to grips with this story and to really cover it.
Yeah, it's not rocket science. You can just as what I've put together is certainly not rocket science. And I'm just repeating what others have said. If the media is not picking it up, it's because they're intentionally not wanting to go there. There is a dimension of the media where you choose your battles and you're relying on interplay with official to have the ability to ask certain questions, gain entry. There could be other reasons why they're observing this etiquette of not asking anything, but I would argue they are falling down on their professional calling. Yeah.
Oh, definitely big time. They really are pretty bad. Yeah, I've also put a note here that judges are meant to set the example of this seek for the truth.
Yep.
But for me, another problem with judges is that they align themselves to political parties. I find that incredulous.
Yeah.
Being from the UK.
Yeah, and you can see, and another subject for another. We could have this debate about the system in the U.S., democracy in the U.S.,
Yeah.
and when you cast your ballot for sheriff and judge and whatnot that you don't do in the UK or in Canada, Australia. There might be virtues to that. But I could see in those canons that I was citing off there, there's some rigor about that, and that's the idea of maintaining confidence in part relates to that, where that political stripe could not be apparent in what you're doing to distance yourself from that. But how do you in practicality do that? And I'm not sure that this is a Republican Democrat thing. When I talk about politics, it might be a small p politics there. You'd have to get into, if there were a syndicate, you'd have to define it, check its actions, and understand what it's motivated to do. If I had to, in my, as I say earlier, I've been analyzing analyses for decades, and
Sure.
And if I had to put human interaction down to one word, it would be the C word, control. Mm-hmm. So if I had to look at certain infiltrations and manipulations, the natural inclination is for people to try to gain the upper hand and control for benefit, which is your x-axis in my diagram. That's natural, innate behavior, unless and until you have sufficient infrastructure to guard against that. And so your institutions will naturally fall apart if you don't manage them.
Indeed. I mean, I'll if I could ask you one more question.
Yep.
When we're looking at America from sort of our external perspective, I think we're the rest of the world is trying to tell, in general, America that certain things need to change. Mm-hmm. That we're saying to them, I'll give you a couple of examples. The death penalty, the amount of people they incarcerate, as I mentioned to you earlier, Oklahoma's solution to the COVID-19 problem for some of them is to go and buy more guns because they're feared about, security being lapsed. Right. But have you come across this concept of American exceptionalism, whereby it's like, well, we're not going to change what we do because we're not the same as you. We're our own unique place, the way it was set up and everything, and we're quite happy with the way the system works.
Yeah. Yes. And or I call that pride, or some people suggest wrapped in the flag, maybe excessively. But the problem with that. If you look at the totality of the U.S., there's some incredibly great things, right?
Yes.
that they achieved and lead, and so there's a tremendous upside. And then one of the beauties of Canada and today the UK, not the case prior to say the Second World War, but is that we enjoy the benefit of living in the shadow thereof, right? So we have. I mean, this starts to get into a broader discussion, but I think it is at least safe to say there's a different treatment. I mean, you would certainly want to look at this, in this particular case, how these people came to the position they're in, and does politics, small p politics, play a role in this? Maybe, I think, as you've said before, this would never happen in Scotland. I can't see this happening in Canada.
No.
But and therefore, that's why it's important to shine the light appropriately, see what's going on for all concerned, and most particularly for Americans who would hold in a very high regard their institutions that are otherwise pretty incredible. There are these these outliers there.
Yeah, no, certainly the actions and press conferences and stuff of Ken Kratz would never be allowed in any other country.
No,
that just wouldn't be allowed.
I don't think it's allowed there either.
No.
Begs the question why.
Yes.
I think he's regretted that he's sort of retracted his position on that. But, once the cows are out of the barn, you can't.
Yeah. Well, I look at the time. It's flown past. That's an hour and 20. That's 120 minutes by the dudes.
120 minutes. Yeah.
No, it's 80 minutes, but the dude would have you believe it's 120. Anyway, no, it's been absolutely brilliant. Looking at the dates that we've been on, the first one was the 3rd, and then it goes 17.
Yeah, can't recall. I have that somewhere.
No, 14, 17, 20. So by my reckoning, that means that we're due another one around about the 23rd.
I might run out of material. Maybe Stephen Avery will be released after all. Maybe they'll accelerate the delivery of this thing and come back and say, no, we'll give over the evidence, and what's more, we'll recommend a release. How's that?
I'm one of these sort of glass half full type of guys. I always have been. Looking ahead, maybe this case could be the one that really made people, sort of stop and realize, where things are going wrong.
I can't see them not learning a lesson from this. There'll have to be a dividing line. If there is a syndicate, there would have to be a dividing line to see who they throw under the bus, because they don't want to throw themselves under the bus. Will, in the first case, the Avery bill itself in name was going to sort of martyrize Stephen Avery and make that kind of statement. Can you imagine the nature of what will come? And this will be an international. I can't imagine any law school out there turning down a class on Stephen Avery and what went on here.
Oh, absolutely
fascinating. But unfortunately for Stephen, that pie chart is that window's closing 5% per year. Clock's ticking, tick tock.
Yeah. No, certainly. I mean, it might be very simplistic, but I can't help thinking that one of the reasons, or the main reason, why scooters as I call them, didn't look at Brendan's case was because they didn't want to be the ones that helped Stephen get out before. They didn't want to release Brendan before Stephen. I think if it's the other way around, I think if Stephen was released and that case goes to SCOTUS, I think they look at it.
It could be. Now, if that were the case, then I would suggest, and again, some of our lawyer friends, Travis perhaps, but this idea that the Supreme Court would decide over an overall greater good versus the facts as they sit, so that they would make a calling of convenience. Maybe I'm naive there, but it's quite likely that there's a larger issue at play, and that may be affecting the circuit court as well, right? Can you imagine the linchpin that will be unleashed on this thing?
Yeah, no, I certainly think that the Supreme Court were like Pontius Pilate and just wash their hands of it. They didn't want to be the ones to, even though they've got that authority, and they could have used their authority for so much good.
Yeah. So we're certainly going to study whatever, if and when, this response. It'll be studied.
Is it something like the 17th? It's 21 days. Something like the 17th, I think. And
this may continue. We don't know the full depths of this COVID-19. So will it? I think in Canada here they were suggesting there could be rotating batches of this thing for 12 months. We don't know the time horizons of this malady. So but for this little discussion, just how that plays on the timelines for the circuit court. I guess I haven't understood the delays to date, the need for them.
Well, no, according to one of the reports I read, it said that, everything is although they're having to stop oral arguments that were scheduled, I got the impression that there are going to be people who are going to be operating the system, but not in one main building, and maybe that, give them a bit of leeway for getting everything set up. But I would have thought 21 days is plenty long enough.
Yeah, and as an aside, it's interesting, these televised, that's becoming a modern trend, same with our universities, that I wonder when this is all done, will we bounce back to what we were, or will we take a new direction, and the notion of some of these institutions showing up in person may become a thing of the past. Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, since Thursday, since last night, I haven't left the home to do a lesson. They've all been here. They've all been, believe it or not, using StreamYard. So it's been really handy because I can do the screen share. The only problem is it's like when you're in the room with somebody, you've got eyes with the amount of vision you've got. When you're relying just on a camera, and I really miss simple things like, what I've really missed is I have so many kids, and they know I always come with a bag of sweets, and I always give them a sweet, So
you can't dispense those through the internet.
I've said to them all today, I've said, now then, would you prefer a virtual mint, a virtual, fruit smoothie, or a virtual chocolate, and it's horrendous, you can't actually give them anything, and you can't sort of be there to help them.
Yeah, it's not the same.
But I suppose
the big thing I wonder about, the changing gears a little bit, but this malady, then to me the steps that we've taken have been, as we've said before, very good, and it's amazing how people have responsibly and dutifully stepped forward. The other side of that is, I wonder how you maintain the system, how you prevent a collapse, and keeping in mind that a supply chain is not a chain; it's a web, it's a network. It's got diverse points of mission critical failure possibility, and the statistical basis to say, hey, that supply chain is safe, gets very difficult to. In other words, you could induce a collapse, and so to me, it's a measured and a balanced response. And much as the media were really going after, say, Trump, and the same here in Canada, I'm sure over in the UK as well, giving them the gears about perhaps not acting with a heavy hand off the start, I think what they've done is a measured response. And someday we'll look back at this and we'll judge, differently, 2020 hindsight. But you can be too heavy-handed and collapse the system, and that'll be in nobody's interest either. So I just suggest it's a balancing act. You don't maximize on the one front. The discussion would have to be contextualized as a balance, and that's what I'm missing. Where's the balance argument? But
yeah, here in the UK, we had a certainly a turning point within the BBC, when on the night, it was a night in, I'm going to say, I think it was a November in 1987. All the weather reports for that evening for what was going to happen sort of overnight was that there would be a stiff breeze, or it would be a bit windy. And it wasn't until everybody had gone to bed and it was the last weather report of the night at, say, 11:30 or 11:50, when the weather reporter had to come on and say, folks, it's going to be blowing a gale. It's there's a tornado heading towards us. And the next morning, of course, big parts of down south, Englandshire, were flattened by this, and it was like ever since then, there's always been this erring on the side of caution. So whenever bad weather is possible, it's always sort of intensified. It's always presented as being, it could be worse than what they think it is, but just to be on the safe side because they were caught out on that one time.
Yeah. Erring on the side of caution.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting there, Paul. We'll see how this all unfolds, and hope everybody's surviving it okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's here in the Borders, I believe we've had, I'm going to say, I think there's been about 3 or 4 people that have actually contracted it and are, a positive. I know that the Borders General Hospital, which is the main hospital for the whole of the Borders, the Scottish Borders, is slightly bigger than say Manitowoc County at 82,000. It's over the 100,000, but it's not a big population, although it's spread over a reasonably big area. So you've got this one main hospital, and certainly they've been clearing stuff out. Apparently, I know one of the guys that has a storage unit, so they've been taking a lot of stuff hastily to his storage unit, so that they can then open up for the possibility that there's going to be a requirement to treat people who are, seriously ill and need the ventilators and stuff. So.
Yep. No, I don't know.
But we hope that it's just, as you say, it's just precautionary, that they're just erring on the side of caution.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, we'll know more, I guess, in the months to come. I just that other side of the coin. How do you maintain this for without collapsing the system? For if this went into months, like even the banks, those supply chains are referred to, like you almost have to invoke martial law and the end of civil liberties, one way or t'other.
I mean, certainly, pubs, clubs, bars, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
restaurants that rely on that business, and it's not just the owners of these businesses; it's also the staff they employ.
Yep.
It's
laid off. Here too, same right across the board. It's incredible, unprecedented, I would say.
Yeah. No, I suppose inevitably, because that they reckon that ultimately, certainly here in the UK, I don't know if this is UK worldwide, 80% of us are gonna contract it anyway. Wow. It's just the idea is just to try and make it so that it's manageable for the health service by not having this sudden peak.
Yeah, just amazing.
Because at some point, as you say, there has to be a relaxing of it. Otherwise, we might as well all shoot ourselves now.
Yeah. It's we certainly, the measures taken so far would, I would assume, put us in a whole different category than had we ignored, this thing, and some extraordinary measures being taken, which would, I would assume, change the propagation of this thing. But nobody quite knows what this is yet. So, maybe this has been in the system and incubating for a long time, and we're late to catch it. And I think that's one of the insidious parts of this. You don't have the normal symptoms that would cause you to seek relief.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's so similar to like a lot of normal seasonal flu. There could be people that have had it and didn't realize.
See, that's the other thing. So when is flu season, and what are the normal stats on that? So that's going to overlay, right? Yeah. And we presumably won't know which end is up on that. Whether this is a regular flu or whether this is something greater.
Yeah. Oh well, that's an hour and 34 minutes that I've kept you.
We got off the Stephen Avery, then we were trying to solve the world problem there. But just a tremendous shout out to all the truthers out there working diligently on the many fronts, and keep up the good work. It's incredible.
Yes, and certainly, I think definitely we don't want to pigeonhole ourselves into certain theories and becoming these narrow-minded people that are
inclusive.
just,
exactly.
Yeah.
Open to the diversity of views out there, and
But I think that sometimes even if you've gone down one path, which ultimately leads to a dead end, you've probably gone down quite a lot of the path, and you've just chosen the final last bit that was the dead end. But again, you've uncovered a lot of things that will then make sense.
Yeah. It's all good learning. I just my plea is for the breadth of coverage when I see certain domains, particularly in the macro area, less researched, and I see certain researchers pull away. I would suggest no, keep the keep the spotlight on that as well. That's a critical addition to all the other stuff. I guess that's the best way to put it. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to say cheerio. There were some comments along the way. There was one in particular, if I can find it, that was.
They didn't like the purple.
I love the purple. Love the purple. That was the main comment that I got. Yes.
I'm running out of this one reason I can't do any more of these. I'm running out of primary colors. I'm into the pastel shades, and I'm running out of options.
I don't know where it went. It was basically along the lines of. Oh, sorry. There we go. It was stamping at the face.
What can we do? Yeah, keep me. Yes. What can we try to get along? So this is, and that's a very constructive. And I meant to. Hopefully, my points aren't all doom and gloom, because at the end of the day, you've got to have something to do. And I think the vocal now to get the FBI involved. I mean. You could go down to the front office and put in an application or something. But I think by expanding the discussion and responsibly. So again, as long as we're responsible in that regard. But and in other words, not just following the parade. Not just following the KZ parade and following the micro truther parade. Having that broader context and pushing that out there, because you're going to stumble across stuff that's going to eventually catch the eye of journalists, and that changes the dynamic incredibly. And once that hits a tipping point, then I think the main thing is for the truther community to keep analyzing. With that open mind and keeping that these shared forums and suggesting, just by pointing to the media, hey, you guys have you have a professional obligation here.
Yes.
That may not change their mind, but eventually their mind will be changed for them if they're sort of embarrassed getting on top of the story.
Absolutely. Okay, well, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
You too, Paul. Yeah, all the best. And shout out to your colleagues again. And we'll do this again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Look forward to it. I always feel like I'm really fortunate, because I'm the one that gets to read through it all before all the viewers do. So very fortunate position.
If it's revolting, then you can turn it back. But you'll be the gatekeeper.
Okay then. I'd like to, as I say, thank you very much for joining me. Look forward to the next time. I'd like to thank everybody that's joined in, and if you've liked this video, then this is Paul Capaldi and Fleetside, and if you haven't liked the video, this is Eric Cozy on Making a Murderer. If you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe. Bye for now.
All the best.
Cheers.